Welcome to the
Evening, everybody. Welcome back to Seahawks Forever. Tonight on the show, clarity on Uchenna Nwosu's restructured contract today, confirmed by John Schneider and posted on Over the Cap. Where does it leave the Seahawks' current cap situation? I'll get into that. And also, how does that edge group now look? I've been saying all offseason it's a spot the Seahawks will and should dip into in what is a very deep and intriguing edge class. I'll break down the position, how it stacks up on the roster currently, why it is such a big need, and maybe who some good draft fits might be for the Seahawks at that spot. Also, I'm going to react to the Get Got podcast with Michael Robinson and Marshawn Lynch. Always entertaining. But the episode that landed today with DK Metcalf as the guest, it was recorded after the trade. Some are making a big deal out of some of the things he said. Lots of buzz about it. I think too big of a deal. I will explain up next on the show. This is Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Tonight's show brought to you by the folks at Doer, built for doing lifestyle apparel for every occasion. Shopdoer.com is where you want to go. That's spelled D-U-E-R. They also have flagship stores in Los Angeles and Denver. And these right here are, in my opinion, their trademark, their flagship, the foundation of everything they do. My go-to jeans, they're stretch performance jeans. They have 20% stretch. They move with you. They are light. They are versatile, extremely comfortable, but also built for doing. And right now, you will get 20% off your first order for going to the special URL for being a viewer or listener of the podcast. That is shopdoer.com/forever. Again, shopdoer.com/forever for 20% off your first order. Welcome in, everybody. There is news today. And if you're wondering where I was yesterday, just peep the background there. Did a little exploration yesterday out in the Arizona desert. Really had a nice time. But a lot to come back to today. We're going to start off with some news, some things starting to hit the cap now. We're starting to get a clearer picture of some of these deals. And if you didn't watch my episode the other day with Chris Clough, I would urge you to do so. Chris used to cover the team for a long time as a beat reporter. He's also written a couple of books on the team. And I asked him why it's taking so long for these big Seattle free agent contracts to hit over the cap and spot track, for the details of it, the structure to be released. And why do we need to know this? So that we know what the first year cap hit's going to be. So we get a clear picture of exactly what the salary cap looks like for 2025. And Chris had a great answer. He said, look, all three of these deals, we're talking about Sam Darnold, DeMarcus Lawrence, Cooper Kupp, are deals that when they come out, we see the structure, they're all going to look very, very team friendly. These are players that were motivated to be here for one reason or another. The Seahawks were able to get him at I guess there's no better word for it than discount. And the agents are the ones that leak this information out early. The teams have some time before they have to file it with the union, and the union's not going to leak that stuff out. It comes from the agents. And they're not going to leak information that doesn't look upon their client favorably, and because they're trying to get other clients as well, right? And so right now, with where Uchenna Nwosu's deal, and he had a $21 million cap hit as of yesterday, highest on the team, they shaved about $11 million off of that. He essentially just flat out took a pay cut. And the Seahawks did give him some additional money up front, so he gets some cash now. That's the trade-off. But also, this is where he wanted to be. And so he just agreed to take a pay cut. Still a 2-year deal. They didn't push any money into the future. Next year's cap hit will be about $20 million. But for right now, it's 11. They save $11.8 million. His cap hit is around 10 right now. And then in 2026, it'll be $20 million. But they'll be able to move on from him next year if they so choose and save 11.5. So it's a win-win on both sides. And we got some clarity today, as I mentioned, on why he might have been motivated to take a deal like that. It's not just because he's one of the leaders in that locker room, that he wants to be here, that he wants to play for Mike McDonald in that defense. Still just 28 years of age. He's missed 16 games the last 2 years. Or actually, he's played 16 games the last 2 years, so he's missed 22. But also, John Schneider confirming today on his radio show that he had surgery as soon as the season ended. And that the surgery, he didn't say what it was on. Now, he obviously had the quad injury last year and the knee. And then the year before that, he had the torn pectoral. So you have to figure it's something that happened in 2024 that needed a little more work on it. Came back healthy the last 3 games of the year last year, started to look like his own self. But it's significant enough that Schneider did indicate that they're not sure at this point if he'll be ready to go at the beginning of training camp. May have to start training camp on the PUP list. So that's, very similar to Ernest Jones' deal. Where that came out, we were all kind of surprised. 3 years, $33 million. The guarantee number was lower than we expected, was lower than what other players of his age and similar contract situation around the league were signing for as free agents. And then we find out that he had a cleanup procedure on his knee as soon as the season was over. So there's some uncertainty there. The team wants some protection in the event that they can't recover from that injury, or that they're not the same when they come back from it. So that's where things stand today with Uchenna Nwosu, which is newsworthy in and of itself, but it was great timing in regards to what I wanted to talk about tonight, and that is the edge position as a whole. And I'm going to get into that. Before I do, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you don't already. Hit that bell for notification of future episodes. All the other ways that you can support the channel are listed down below with links included, including how to become a member. A lot of new members lately. Thank you for all of you for signing up for memberships. Welcome to the channel. Just another way to help support me and the channel. And what you'll get in return for that is on these live feeds, you can star your comments. You can use special icons so that I can see, I can move you to the front of the line, but also members only content. And we'll see some of that over the next couple of weeks, including tomorrow night I will go live for members only. It'll be about the same time frame, about 7 o'clock, 7:30 Pacific time. Watch Twitter at Seahawks Forever for details of that. But the live stream itself will be for members only. Now, if you're not a member and you're thinking, well, wait, I want to see it too, as soon as the live stream is over, it'll post, as it always does, to YouTube, and then it'll be available. I'll make sure it's available for anyone to watch. But as for the actual interaction that takes place and being able to watch the live stream in the moment live, that will be members only. All right, let's get into this edge group, because I've been working on some notes and thinking about focusing a show on this position for a couple of weeks now. And the reason is, and really in the last few days especially, I posted a mock draft, showed it to you Monday in the episode when I had Griffin Sturgeon on. And I took Jahad Campbell at 18. And I had posted it on Twitter in advance of that. And the reaction I got to it was mixed, of course, as usually these mock drafts are, but predominantly negative. And I quickly realized the reason was that most fans just don't understand what Jahad Campbell is or can be, and that's what I had in mind when I took him at 18. Certainly the Seahawks don't need a starting off-ball linebacker at the moment. They just brought back Ernest Jones. We saw the impact he had on the defense last year after the trade. Tyrese Knight, now heading into his second year, the fourth-round pick out of UTEP. We all like what we saw from him as a rookie. He's the starter at weak side linebacker. So they're set there. Do they need depth? Sure. Drake Thomas right now is your third linebacker, and as much as I liked him when he was acquired, as much as the coaching staff likes him, that's an upgradable position. But that's not why I would take Jahad Campbell at 18 in the first round. That would make no sense. That wouldn't be a wise use of draft resources. That would be, what's an example I can think of? That would be like drafting someone to play Devin Witherspoon's precise position in the first round this year. I mean, that's probably the best analogy I can come up with, although that's not a great one either, because you can move him around. Well, that's the thing about Campbell as well. There are many draft analysts who believe that his best skill set is rushing the passer, getting after the passer. And while you may have seen today, in fact, on Twitter, an analytical site that put up all of the pressure rates for the top rated draft prospects at edge and linebacker, and his pressure rate wasn't great. He wasn't allowed to just pin his ears back and go after the quarterback all that often at Alabama. He was used as an off-ball linebacker. When you start to just narrow your focus and look at him through that lens, he becomes a really intriguing player. Extremely similar in build, height, weight, athletic profile, and positional profile to Micah Parsons, who many believe is the best defensive player, most impactful defensive player in the NFL. Similar profile, played off-ball linebacker at Penn State. Dan Quinn, when he got to Dallas, decided to make him a full-time edge, and look what happened. That's the lens that I view Jahad Campbell through. So I give you that context to set up this discussion, because I've heard a lot of this from some of you over the last week. We don't need another edge player. We're fine there. And I get it by name. Look at the jersey number and the name on the back of the jersey. You like those guys. We've got 4 of them, right? We're talking about Uchenna now. We know he's going to be on the roster in 2025, potentially beyond. We know Boye Mafe. We know Derek Hall. And then we went out and signed DeMarcus Lawrence, right? Well, let's unpack that position group a little bit. So leading the way there would have been Nwosu if it hadn't been for the injuries the last couple of years. And honestly, I'm not so sure if he has a healthy 23 and a healthy 24 and he's 100% healthy coming in 25, maybe they don't invest in DeMarcus Lawrence. That might have been the hedge there, right? What's Nwosu known for? I mean, he can get to the passer. He's had some good sack seasons. He had 9.5 his first year as a Seahawk. DeMarcus Lawrence had a couple double-digit sack seasons in his prime with Dallas, but they're both known as elite, if not elite, close to it, edge setters, run defenders. That's first and foremost, but they can also get to the quarterback. So Lawrence might have been a little bit of a hedge. Mafe, wrapping up his rookie season or his rookie contract this coming year. Career numbers all look good. We've seen the ascension. We've seen the path that he's been on. He gets a little bit better every year. We saw him coming out of Minnesota with just dripping with athleticism, but he was raw. He was a guy that he didn't play football as a young man. He came to the game kind of later, and so he was very raw coming into the league. But the athleticism jumped off the page. It's the reason he was rated where he was. Seahawks take him in the second round. 18 sacks in the last 3 seasons, 20 tackles for loss, 32 quarterback hits, 9 passes defense, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumbles recovery. Fills up the stat sheet. Has been pretty durable. He's gotten nicked up a couple of times. Doesn't seem to be a concern. And still you can argue that maybe an ascending player. That we haven't seen the best out of Boye Mafe. But Boye Mafe is eligible now for a contract extension. Right? With 1 year left on his deal, the Seahawks could open negotiations now, try to sign him up long term, maybe get ahead of where the market's going to go. Although the edge market has exploded in the last couple of months anyway, they kind of missed out on that. But the question for me about Mafe is he going to be worth what a young edge player on the open market with his productivity might command? And I'm not so sure. And I say that for 2 reasons. One is, I still don't think we've seen the best of Mafe, and so I don't want to pay him based on what we might see in his final year. But also, we've seen the top of the market. We've seen what happened last couple of weeks, right? With Myles Garrett. Certainly, Parsons is going to be on the back end of that. Trey Hendrickson may be on the verge of signing a new deal in Cincinnati. That may reset the market itself. But Gregory Rousseau is a name that if you're not familiar with it, you should be. Because I think what happened with him impacts Mafe's market. Gregory Rousseau, Buffalo Bills, we saw him here in Seattle last year, just signed his second contract. 4 years, $80 million, $49 million guaranteed. He's got, they leveled it out pretty evenly, dispersed it throughout the life of the contract. Looks like there is a void year tacked on. His cap hits tap out in the middle of the deal, 3 straight years of between $23 and $25 million. So we're not talking Myles Garrett money here or top of the market, but this is a guy that hasn't been as productive as Mafe. And yet he just got $480 and $49 million guaranteed. As we sit here today, do you feel like Mafe is that kind of player? If he goes out and gets 12 sacks, are you comfortable with Mafe after this season signing an $80, $90 million deal? There's a slight difference here, though, right? And I mentioned that Mafe's been more productive through 3 seasons, 18 sacks. Through Rousseau's first 3 seasons, 17 sacks. Now, he completed his rookie deal before he got that extension. He had 8 sacks last year, right? So 25 career sacks. But Gregory Rousseau, even though he just completed his rookie contract and is entering his 5th year in the league, is 25 years old. Do y'all know how old Boye Mafe is? Take a guess. Put it in the comments before I say it out loud, and don't Google it. He's 27 years old. He'll turn 28 in November during the season, and he's just now entering his 4th year. So to me, that like the development might level out. He might be what he is. And I don't want to pay him that kind of a deal yet. Maybe they let it play out exactly like the Bills did with Rousseau. Let him play this last season on his rookie contract. See how he fits in. See if he takes that next step. And again, yeah, you go out and you become a dominant player, because that's what I haven't seen from Mafe. He doesn't take games over. He flashes, but those stats are compiled over a long sample size. Like he doesn't He just doesn't dominate the way I want a young edge rusher with his athletic profile going into his fourth season in the league, a guy that fancies himself as someone that might be getting paid. I don't see it yet. So that's one thing. Then we go to Derek Hall, drafted in the second round the year after Mafe, so entering his third season, right? We didn't see much of him out that first season. He was banged up, had the shoulder, never really got into the rotation on a regular basis. But last year, 8 sacks, breakout season. We saw everything that we saw on tape from him at Auburn. We saw him succeed with last year. And that's what I always say about these prospects, right? We want to see the traits carry over. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And what we saw from Hall, is maybe not the twitchiest athlete on the edge, but a guy that's powerful and has an elite motor and wins with power. We saw him doing that last year. I still think there's more in the tank there. I still think he can add more to his pass rush repertoire. And he's a guy that is younger. He's 20, entering his third season, 24 years old. So Mafe, Hall, still on their rookie deals, one about to expire, one halfway through. And then Nwosu with the injury history, and then DeMarcus Lawrence, 32 years old, under contract through 2027, coming off a significant foot injury, but says he's 100% healthy. But he's 32. Again, he takes Draymond Jones' place. He's older, certainly. But if he's healthy, he's a much more reliable player, much more productive player. That's it. Those are your 4 guys. If you want to scroll farther down the roster, you can find Jamie Sheriff still on the roster, Tyreek Smith still on the roster, futures contract. That's it. And so no matter which way you look at this, if you just strictly look at it as like I do, like the big picture, kind of moving forward and trying to set yourself up for the future, think about finishing 2025, heading into 2026. Nwosu may be gone. If he doesn't have a fully healthy, really productive year, they're not going to let him hit that last year of his deal at a $21 million cap hit. So he'd be a cap casualty candidate. DeMarcus Lawrence, if he's not healthy and productive all year long, he would also be a casualty, potentially. Then you'd have Mafe on an expiring deal, have to make a decision about him, and Hall going into the last year of his rookie contract. That's it. I don't know how anyone can look me in the eye, or virtually through Twitter or social media, and tell me that edge isn't a need. And then, but wait, there's more. They carry 5 edge players. Last year, as soon as they moved off Darrell Taylor, they went out and got Trevis Gibson. I think the same day. You need 5 on the roster for now. But also you look at 26, 27, the cupboard's pretty bare. And this is the way, like I want to help you, right? Help me help you, straight out of Jerry Maguire. And I see it. Like some of you that I have had conversations with over the months and even years, like I do see sometimes that the way that I reason and the way that I think about these things, that sometimes it clicks and it gets through to you and you get it. You cannot go into the draft every year only looking to fill holes for that roster today. You have to see the big picture. You have to think ahead. And that's why I think edge is a big need in the draft. They absolutely 100% are going to draft someone from this edge class. Very, very likely in those first 92 picks. It's going to be one of the first 5. And don't be surprised if it's 18. Now, there's only a couple of guys that I think might be worthy of that 18th pick. Rob Staten, who was on the show last week, he had Donovan Ezeraku out of Boston College up there for a while. I could see that. Looks like a Mike McDonald type of player. Just incredibly bendy and twitchy off the edge. You know, he's a little shorter than you'd like, but he makes up for it with really long arms, and he's got that repertoire. Like, he's an advanced pass rusher, one of the best pressure rates in the country last year, looked great in Mobile, dominated down there, had a great combine. He's the whole package. He's everything. You watch the interviews. He sounds like a Seahawk, walks, talks like a Seahawk. He could be in play at 18. Some might feel like that's a little bit high for him because of his frame. Based on this draft class, I don't think it would be. Shamar Stewart's another guy, and I know a lot of people point to the fact only a sack and a half. But remember what Nick Scorton, his teammate, along with Shamar Turner, like they had a loaded defensive line there. None of those guys had big sack numbers, including Scorton. He had 4. He talked about what that scheme was like compared to what he was used to at Purdue before he transferred to A&M. And they just don't let you pin your ears back and go after the quarterback there. They just don't ask that of you. I was listening to the Athletic podcast today with Robert Mays, and they made a Jadeveon Clowney comp to Stewart. Like athletically, that's who he's built like. He could be in play there. I know a lot of you want Mike Green to be involved there, and he could be incredibly, maybe the most explosive edge player, pass rusher in this draft. But there is the matter of a history of sexual assault, both in high school and at Virginia, and then he had to move on to Marshall. Now he's been upfront about it. He's been transparent about it. He talked about it at the Combine. But we know how risk averse the Seahawks have been when it comes to character and durability. And they just don't touch guys typically that have red flags in their past from a character perspective. So I'm not sure about Green. If, that would be one to really watch the 30 visit lists. If they were to bring Mike Green in, I don't think they met with him at the Combine. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But if they were to bring him in for a 30, they brought Jalen Carter in for a 30 2 years ago with all those concerns about his character, right? So maybe we'll see that. And then some other guys that I think 18's a little rich for, but that might be in the first round mix. Maybe we trade down a little bit. Nick Scorton mentioned him out of A&M. And then Jod Campbell mentioned him earlier. Now it's come out that he's having shoulder surgery on his labrum. Might not be ready to go in time for training camp. So that may impact his draft stock. And then Jalen Walker, who's a similar profile out of Georgia, off-ball linebacker, but plays a lot of edge, really explosive off the edge. Some scouts like him better there. Mikael Williams, his teammate at Georgia, didn't have the pro day that some people were expecting, but you turn on the tape and he's athletic as heck. He could be in play at 18. Williams is a guy that is routinely being mocked before 18, whereas Stewart's kind of all over the place. I've seen him as high as like 8. And then I've seen him not in the first round. Same with Ezeraku. I've seen him in the teens and then not in the first round. James Pearson, another one I know a lot of you would have interest in because of the sack numbers and the combine that he had. But that's one that I think the character concerns there from everything that you're hearing might be even more significant than they would be with Mike Green. I don't think James Pierce is going to be a guy that's on the Seahawks draft board. And then you talk about value later, right? Because I said one of those top 5 picks in the top 92. So, you have 4 picks on day 2, and there's a big bunch of guys that I really, really like that figure into that area. Landon Jackson, we saw the combine he had. He dominated the Senior Bowl. Femi Oladejo, you've heard me talk about him out of UCLA, converted off-ball linebacker, full-time edge last year. Really found his home there. One of my favorite guys in this draft, and a guy that, again, just screams Seahawk in the way he carries himself, his character, his work ethic, everything else. Savion Jones out of LSU was another guy, really long and physical off the edge that I was impressed with in Mobile. The 2 Ohio State players, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuamalo, I think either of them would fit. Neither are the twitchy kind of edge players that you like, but both can set the edge in the run game, and they're both character guys. They're both culture building type guys that you could absolutely see fit into the Seahawks. Braden Swinson out of LSU, another guy that has some potential character red flags, some attitude things going on there, but really, really explosive. And then Jordan Birch, who out of Oregon, who's more of the kind of the inside outside guy. plays between 280, 290, can play defensive tackle, can also move out to the edge and set the edge there, and get after the passer a little bit. So, and that's just kind of tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of guys later on in the draft too that are intriguing. So if they don't touch it in the top 5, you can absolutely expect them to on day 3. And part of the reason we're here too, and there's still an opportunity that one of these guys could step up, is we just haven't gotten what we wanted to out of Mike Morris. Like, he's technically, although he's one of those guys that the Seahawks are kind of funny sometimes in how they list positions on their roster. They have Mike Morris, Leonard Williams, and DeMarcus Lawrence listed as defensive ends, which they really don't use in their scheme, but they have them listed that way. And Morris is a guy that, coming out of Michigan, we thought he was going to play some edge, looks more like an interior guy, just didn't really force his way onto the field last year, and that was disappointing. But he's certainly one that could, Jordan Birch kind of has a similar profile to Mike Morris, right? Bigger, physical, long, a little less twitchy, but a guy that can play inside and outside. So if they draft someone like that, similar profile, probably not the best news for Mike Morris, who I think is going to have an uphill battle to make the roster anyway this season. So that's where I'm at with the edge class. And then I want to touch on this Get Got podcast, because a lot of you reached out and asked me about it today. And there was a lot of buzz online today about how it confirms that there might have been a riff with DK and Geno, or that maybe DK didn't see eye to eye with the new coaching staff or with John Schneider. And I had people reach out to me or tag me, and you got to watch this. If you watch this yet, this is kind of inflammatory stuff. I didn't see it that way. I watched the whole thing. And I mean, first of all, I love me some Mike Robinson and Marshawn Lynch. It's just such a great podcast. I love listening to those guys. Although I will say this, it is really hard to watch on YouTube. And I even tried on Spotify, but they didn't, I think maybe they've done it by now, but I think Spotify at least uploads the audio version at some point later that's unedited. But the YouTube version, because those guys swear so much and they edit it out, it's almost unwatchable. It's just really, really hard to try and keep up and sort of pay attention and follow along what they're saying. But the things I did take away from it, first of all, there were some rumblings the last week or so that maybe he had an issue with Geno Smith. That doesn't seem to be an issue at all. I didn't take that away from that conversation at all. He seemed to have a lot of respect for Geno. He certainly did have some animosity for Ryan Grubb, but that shouldn't catch any of us by surprise at this point, right? Corbin Smith wrote that great piece after Grubb was fired with some inside anonymous sources with some quotes that, that thing was so dysfunctional and Grubb was so over his head and he was such a bad fit that they considered moving on from him during the bye week. And that makes sense because they went back and they referenced the game where it was against San Francisco, and DK actually referenced it. You remember when he went to the sideline, he asked for the headset and you could read his lips and he was yelling. He was like, "Get me Grubb," right? And he was yelling at him. And it was all, he gave some clarity on the exact situation. There was a 3rd and long, and he didn't give the DB's name, but there was a specific DB, and he said, "Look, this guy's just sitting at the down marker every single time. Let me run by him. Call something deep. Let me get by him because he's watching the marker. He's not protecting his backside." And he said Grubb called all hitches, which I'd never heard that terminology before, right? It was like, I think Mike Leach rolled over in his grave when he heard that kind of the modern version of or a bastardized version of all go or 4 verts, right? 4 hitches. He's like, that plays right into exactly what defense they were running. And so I don't think it's any surprise that he had an issue with Grubb, but Grubb's gone. And then he just said, you know what? Sometimes he didn't even say sometimes. He just said, you know what? The grass is greener, and it was just time for me to go. And that's really that's what I take out of it. Is that he just felt like it was time in his career to try something new. Maybe that had something to do with the new coaching staff and what the plans were on offense and how, they brought this entire offensive coaching staff in It's been in the league for a very long time. And what have they done really well? They've run the football, and that's going to be an emphasis. And maybe he saw the writing on the wall. He saw how much Kubiak likes to use 12 and 13 personnel and two backs and not as much three wide receiver stuff. And maybe he thought his role was going to be diminished a little bit. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense or jibe really well with the reports that he wanted to go somewhere with a better quarterback situation and where they're a contender, because he ends up getting traded to Pittsburgh, or warm weather was the other one too, right? But that was out of his hands. He had no leverage. Those were requests. But Seahawks were going to make the best deal that they could for the team. Now, the thing I did find that was interesting from the podcast is they talked about how he felt like an outsider at times. Because he talked about the guys that were there or that were left from when he started. And there were only 4 players. It was like him and Tyler, and then Michael Dixon and Josh Myers, or Jason Myers. That was kind of it. And he talked about how he felt like an outsider. And, you know, I do, and I've gotten to interact with DK a number of times. I do find him, even though his on-field persona is larger than life, and it's all about intensity, right? I've always viewed him as a person that seems like he's pretty sensitive, takes things to heart. And I do think that he wants to be liked and appreciated. And who better to communicate those kinds of principles than Pete Carroll? And so even though he didn't talk about it specifically, and I'm not implying he has any issues or problems with Mike Macdonald, it's just that, you know, he spent his first 5-6 years in Seattle with Pete Carroll wrapping his arms around him and just really nurturing him and taking care of him. And so maybe he just didn't feel that same kind of love by the new coaching staff. He did mention at one point all the changes and how you have a different offensive coordinator every year. But when he talked about being an outsider, I immediately thought of an analogy from the music world. And I teased this on Twitter earlier today. So here it is. I'm a big Journey fan. And in particular, I'm a huge Steve Perry fan. To me, he's the greatest musician, the most impactful musician in my entire life. Like I probably in some way, shape, or form listen to him almost on a daily basis. You remember the show Behind the Music? Of course you do. You all do. In fact, they've brought it back recently, I think, on Paramount Plus. I love that show. They did a show on Journey and on what led to the breakup and all the kind of inner turmoil and why they couldn't carry on. And they had Steve Perry talking in an interview, and he's not a guy that gives a lot of interviews. So that was, at the time, it was a real coup. And then for about 20 years after that show, nobody heard from him. He basically became a hermit. And he talked about how he just felt like an outsider. He didn't feel like he belonged in the band, like he wasn't one of the original members. And then they go back and they ask all of his bandmates to react to that comment. And they all looked at the interviewer like he was nuts. They're like, how can he be an outsider when he was running the show? He was controlling everything. He was producing all the records. He was the star. He had his own tour bus. He was the guy that all the fans came to see. So I thought that there was a little bit of a connection there, a little bit of an analogy there, where it was odd to me that DK saw himself as an outsider when he was beloved by the majority of the fan base. And from everything I'd ever seen or heard, beloved by his fans or his teammates as well. I just think sometimes we want to change. Haven't you ever been in a job for a while and it's a good, solid job and you can count on it and you like going to work every day, but you just felt like you needed to shake things up and change things? Like, right? Preaching to the choir here. And so I think too much is being made out of like the discontent. I just think DK wanted to move on. He was never a West Coast guy. I just think it was time for change. So now those guys did get into something that Richard Sherman got into about a month ago as well. And I'm not going to try to take one side or the other on this and judge whether it's right or wrong. But the idea that, you know, what's it going to take for a guy to be able to spend his whole career in Seattle? And Richard really hammered on that after Lockett was let go. Like, I didn't get to stay there. Marshawn didn't get to stay there. Bennett, none of those guys got to stay there. And then these guys kind of picked that ball up and ran with it too. In Mike Robb and Sean. I think that's much ado about nothing. I really do. Look around the league. Look around the league. Compile some numbers. How many players play their entire career with one team? It's just so rare now because at some point, the money, because we're talking about stars here, right? We're talking about legendary players, Ring of Honor type players. These are players that are getting paid. At some point, the money doesn't match with the production on the field. You cannot justify. And so, they talked kind of in sad terms about Tyler, and DK said, Tyler was telling me the whole season he didn't think he was going to be here anymore. Well, yeah, because he sees what happens around the league. He wasn't the player he used to be, gives himself up on passing downs, right? Shies away from physical contact. I'm not saying these as criticism, but I'm just saying in a big picture view, when you're evaluating your roster and you're evaluating each employee on the roster, do they give you what you're paying for? And at some point, almost every single one of these legendary players reaches a point where the money doesn't match the production. And you have to move on. Bill Belichick always used to say, better to move on a year early from a player than a year too late. Just listen to a 2-hour podcast today where they were talking about how, with rare exception, in the NFL, you don't see gradual decline in older players. It happens in an offseason. They come back to camp and they're just not the same player anymore. You have to try to project that. Because while the salary cap keeps going up, the salaries seem to go up faster and more significantly than the cap itself. This happens to every single team all around the league. The problem is that the player isn't quite ready to accept yet that they're not worth that money anymore. If they were, or if they would simply take a pay cut. And I'm sure, because we've seen others do it. We've seen others do it. We just saw Uchenna Nwosu do it today. I'm sure during those conversations, and they went on for weeks between the Seahawks, Lockett's representatives, probably throughout the season. That was brought up. That was suggested. Hey, Tyler, we'd love to still have you on the roster. Your role might be diminished, and we can't pay you what we're paying you. Would you be willing to take this amount? And the answer is no. Okay, well, then you get released. That's just how it happens. And it happens to every team. We just got Cooper freaking Kupp, who John Schneider just sat and told you today passed all of his physical exams, in-depth physical exams, imaging, full physical, every test you can do with flying colors. They're confident that he's the Cooper Kupp that we're used to seeing in his prime. But for the Rams, the money they were going to have to pay him wasn't going to match what they felt they might get from him. It was too much of a risk for them. It's just the business. I understand, now I was going to use a term that might be a little crude, but I understand these players' feelings being hurt because they're just wound that way. They're built that way. They're competitors. They don't ever want to be told no. And if they're told no, how do they react to that? Oh, you don't think I'm good enough? You don't think I'm worth that? Okay, let me show it to you. They want that opportunity. And when they don't get it, then they're a little upset. Now, there have been plenty of examples over the years of the Seahawks moving on at the right time. Michael Bennett certainly was never the same again after they moved on from him. Earl was never the same again. Richard was never the same again, although he had the one good year. But I know he was really upset that went down, but you look back at what he was making and coming off the injury he was coming off of, there was just time for change. They clearly were right about Russ. They moved on from him at the exact right time. He's never been the same since. right? Now, Bobby, they might have missed on because he's put together some really good seasons since he left. But it just, I think, again, at a certain point, you just want to get younger. You know, Bobby's the one that, you know, maybe I wish they had just figured out a way to keep him around. You know? So what is that? 1 out of 7 that I just named where it turned out to be a mistake? It's not going to prove to be a mistake with Tyler. He's not going to go have a 1,000-yard season with anyone. There doesn't appear to be a strong market for him at the moment. Hasn't been signed. It's just, and then sometimes you move on from a guy like Draymond Jones and someone goes and pays him $10 million and we all go, what? So, you know, I get it from a player's perspective because of how they're wired, but it's not a Seahawk thing. It's just not. Now, for the sake of where they are today and what we've had to deal with in the last month, this may be related to, you know, it's all the offensive guys that wanted to move on. And we talked about the risk of hiring a defensive head coach. The defensive guys want to be here. They all want to come play for Mike McDonald. And they want to stay. And they're taking less money to do it, like Ernest Jones. And so maybe it's a matter of, you know, so much damage was done. Like the wake that Ryan Grubb has left behind him may have just reached farther than bad play calls and poor execution on the field. That maybe he did some damage that directly or indirectly ended up leading to DK not wanting to be here and Gino trying to get his way out of town as well. So that's how I feel about that stuff. How we doing, guys? What's going on over here? I'm going to start at the bottom and then work my way up because a lot of times when I do this, I'll find that I've already addressed some of the stuff you're talking about, right? Let's go here. Dogzilla Monster, thank you again for the donation. Always good to see you. Any chance Sam Howell is better than Sam Darnold under pressure? No. I don't think so. I just don't think so. And here's why. I just... Darnold's skill set was always better than Howell's, right? You look at their draft profile, you look at their college film coming out. There's a reason that Darnold went third and Howell went in the 5th round. But also, Darnold did it for a full season last year at a high level. And as much as people want to say, well, gosh, he's just not that great under pressure. Most quarterbacks struggle under some pressure. But also that Minnesota offensive line, I think they finally acknowledged that offensive line hasn't been as good as maybe the perception of it was. You know, if you ask most fans last year, name the top 10 offensive lines in the league, Vikings probably would have been one of them, but they've been closer to 20 or 25 the last couple of seasons. That's why they just washed out their entire interior offensive line and changed it out. So he got to see the live bullets in big moments and big games, playoff games. And so, whereas, you know, Howell's been sitting for a year after sometimes guys just get damaged. And I've talked about how much I liked Howell coming out of college and how I liked the idea of the trade at the time, that he showed some good things on tape at Washington, but that was such a dysfunctional offense there and the way that Bieniemy called it and just kind of left him hanging and, you know, shotgun, 70% pass rate, no unpredictability, no creativity at all, no run game, mediocre to poor offensive line himself. Maybe that stuff, you just can't shake that stuff. We've seen it ruin many a good young quarterback. It is kind of funny how nobody's giving Howell a chance at all now of being the guy here or anywhere else. Whereas a year ago at this time, the Seahawks wanted to trade for him. But you know who else did? Denver Broncos and Sean Payton and the LA Rams and Sean McVay. They were in on Howell also, which is why the Seahawks had to give up what ended up being the equivalent of like a late 3rd, early 4th in that pick swap. And now I think if you cut him and he was on the open market, there would be very little, if no interest in him because of reports that he didn't look good in training camp, because of one half of play against Green Bay when the offensive coordinator did him no favors. It's a curious case. It is. I like Sam Howell, and I wish he had an opportunity, but I don't think there's anyone that would watch, the last 2 years of tape, let's say, and think that Sam Howell would be a little bit better under pressure than Darnold. I mean, he's mobile. He can get out and move, but so can Sam. Kevin Dilly says, Huff was the worst offensive line coach ever. So bad he's coaching a different position now. Yeah, tight ends, right? Is it tight ends? It's crazy. And I remember the hire, like all the UW fans and the media in Seattle that covers them, they're like, oh, what a coup. And take it a step further. When Grubb was hired, the immediate speculation was, oh, does that mean Huff's coming too? Because that'd be a great package deal. I was excited about it at the time, mostly based on what other people felt and what they were saying. But clearly, like, at least Huff's still in the league, right? Grubb couldn't get a job anywhere. And I decided not to talk about offensive line today because I'm just kind of tired of it, right? Tevin Jenkins signed with the Browns today. We'll probably get into some of that tomorrow on the members only live feed. But I think I'll do a standalone episode too, just kind of giving my, I've talked about it a lot. A lot of you that engage with me on here or on social media have heard my philosophy even today on how I think this offensive line should be built. And so at some point in the next 5 or 6 days, I'll do an episode basically that I can just refer anyone to in the future instead of having to reconstruct my argument from ground zero every single time on how I feel this offensive line is going to be addressed and fixed. Brian says, he's coaching tight end. Okay, he coached for many years before the offensive line. And that's a pathway that a lot of offensive line coaches, because there's obviously some carryover in the run game. Zach says, tight ends aren't going to know how to block now. That's funny. See, Nate's already thinking ahead. I'm wondering how much JSN would want when his contract is up, depending how he plays the remaining years of a contract. It's impossible to know now because you don't know what the market's going to be. He's going to ask for top of the market, whatever the market is at the time. I mean, Chase just got $40 million a year, right? I don't know that JSN will ever be that kind of player, but maybe he is. Maybe he has 3 straight 100-catch seasons, and he becomes the sort of the penultimate, star on that Seahawks offense. Then he's going to ask for whatever the market can bear at the time. Hey, Thomas Cox, who we don't always agree or see eye to eye when we talk on Twitter, but I appreciate the kind words here. Dan, I agree with your opinion on O-line. Hopefully coaching will help. I think it's huge. I think for the entire offense, and this is going to benefit Sam Darnold as well. And we'll do a whole conversation next week. I've got some really exciting guests coming on. Very, very, very smart people. And when you find out who they are, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I'm going to bridge this subject with them. The idea of the challenges, as we talked about when McDonald was hired, of getting the right guy on offense and then keeping him if he's good. And I think what the Seahawks did this year with their process in not just choosing a new play caller, but the entire staff and bringing all those guys in that had worked together under the same tree and all the accomplished experience they have together, they're not going anywhere anytime soon, and they're going to be together, and they're going to be able to establish, I think, a scheme and a system that makes sense, and they're going to finally achieve that continuity. Anyone who can look at that offense last year and how it was coached by Grubb and Huff and try to make some sweeping judgments about how good the quarterback was or the offensive line or the tight ends or the receivers for that matter or the running backs, it's almost like you just have to kind of do the Men in Black thing. I wish we could in some ways and just forget about last year. Other than Mike Macdonald established his defense and kind of got his legs under him as a head coach. And now he's setting about rebuilding the offense in a very, very similar manner to how he rebuilt the defense. And if he gets that side of the ball taken care of this year, then I'm okay with it taking 3 years, right? And then we'll put it all together and let's go. Talking about receivers, and we'll be looking a lot more at this next week. James Foster, formerly of the 33rd team, is going to come on with me. He's a great draft analyst. We're going to focus on this wide receiver class, so stay tuned for that. There are a bunch of smaller players in this class. There aren't as many big targets. But I don't think the short arms and the small hands matter, right? Worked for Golden Tate. It's about, can a guy separate? Can a guy get open? Can a guy read zones? Can he make tough catches? There's a lot of receivers in this class I like. They're all very different. It's not anywhere near the classes we've seen the last 3 years. Those were elite. You're talking 5-6 guys in the first round each year, and all of them potential, number one wide receivers. This year isn't that, but there's some guys that are really, really fun that I think will really fit in well. Thank you for the donation. The super thanks, Dreams. Do you think MM played any role in DK and Geno? Not from a standpoint of like, I don't want to play for that guy, but maybe just the fact that he's not an offensive guy, right? With Geno, and you can't lump these two in together. With Geno, like his relationship with Pete is next level. It's father-son. It's very, very nurturing. Pete's the one, more so than John, that just kept bringing him back on those one-year deals. He's the one that said when they traded Russ, like, hey, we think we have our guy. He's the one that just really, really helped nurture Geno and get the most out of him. And that's the reason. If Pete's not back in the league, Geno's still a Seattle Seahawk. I'm convinced of that. So I think it's a different situation than with DK. With DK, it does kind of sound like it's not McDonald necessarily. I think he respects him. It's just he didn't think the offense was going to be built to feature him and to allow him to be explosive like he wants to. The irony still exists that he ends up going to Pittsburgh, and they still, as we speak, don't really have a quarterback. They signed Mason Rudolph. He's the only one on the roster. Like that's a very tenuous situation down there. So we'll have to see how that plays out, obviously. Solaria says Steve Smith said Best should move to tight end. Steve Smith's wide receiver takes have almost never been right. Go back and look at his like most obnoxious, loud, like stand on a podium, beat his chest type takes that he tries to have with these wide receivers. He's doing it again now with Tedero McMillan. You almost take it to the bank that Besh is going to be a very, very good receiver because I believe he is. Got to see him up close in Mobile, and he's everything you want in a guy and in a player, a competitor. I think he's a guy that screams Seahawks. I don't know that he'll be as high on their board as some other guys that are available on day two, because I think his skill set is very similar to JSN and Cup. I think they're going to be looking for a more complementary player, either a bigger, like true X, like a Jaden Higgins or a Tet McMillan, or a guy that can take the top off, like a Matthew Golden or a Jalen Noel, or a Jalen Royals, who you obviously know I love. If you've seen the episode on Royals, if you haven't watched it, please do. I think they'll be looking for something different than Besh. But that being said, if they take Jack Besh, you take it to the bank. Like, that's a pick you get excited about. That's where it came from. The Jerry Jeudy thing is kind of where it all started with him, right, Zach? Called Jeudy just a guy, and then Jeudy went out and what did he do? 1,400 yards last year and a bunch of touchdowns. Really had a breakout year with a bad quarterback situation in Cleveland. So Steve Smith is, whatever he says, kind of maybe believe the opposite of it. Kevin asked, should Bobo be moved to tight end? I don't necessarily think in a full position switch, but role-wise, when you talk about running 13 personnel, right, not all of those three tight ends have to be traditional inline two-way tight ends. One of those guys can be a glorified wide receiver, like a Y or a move tight end. I look at a guy like in the draft this year, Jake Brenningstall out of Clemson, who's a tight end, went to the Senior Bowl, went to the Combine, is considered one of the top, I'd say 10 to 12 tight ends in this draft class. He looks like Jake Bobo to me. He's not built like a tight end. He's not going to play in line. He's not going to be, you're not going to call on him to do a lot of blocking. And so he's essentially kind of athletically and just a physical profile very similar to Jake Bobo. And so while I don't think a full true conversion is in the cards, I could certainly see him lining up in one of those like 13 personnel bunch sets in those tight formations and essentially playing a tight end. But Cooper Kupp has done that too. You saw it down with the Rams as much as Sean McVay would really like to have an elite tight end one of these days, and I think this might be the year that he ends up doing that. He would use Kupp kind of in that role. So think more in terms of role as opposed to, what the position is called. Let me see here. Let me go back and just see if I missed anything, because I think I've pretty much covered everything. That's what I wanted to touch on today. Schneider did also say, I found this interesting, that he said we had 5 guys in this week talking specifically about offensive linemen, and all that was reported was Lucas Patrick, Tevin Jenkins, and Dylan Radins. So who are the other 2? That's always interesting. Guys coming in under the radar. And then he said we have another one coming in this weekend. So for those of you who feel like it's imperative, like they have to sign a free agent no matter what, well, they're still looking, and they're still talking with guys, and they're still doing physicals, and they're still having guys in for visits, and they're having another one this weekend. I will say this. I do think it's important for them to sign an experienced offensive lineman, but not someone that they're counting on starting. And I don't believe they will. They're working this draft class hard. And Schneider talked about it again today, how good the group is. They're going to get at least one player from the top part of that group to add to what they have. But they need some experience. They're too young. As they sit here today, they probably have the youngest offensive line group in the entire league. The oldest guy in that group is 27 years old. And so to me, the guy that I want is Lucas Patrick. He did visit with Cincinnati today, so they let him get out of the building without signing him, but there's familiarity there. They didn't have to get to know him as well or bridge new ground because he played for Kubiak last year in New Orleans. So I think he's a guy, maybe he goes to Cincinnati, he weighs the two against each other. He would make a lot of sense because he's started at center and guard. I've compared him to Evan Brown before, who maybe the Seahawks wish they had kept after that 1 year. He goes to Arizona, just signed a second deal down there with them. He's been a real solid player for them, playing mostly left guard, but he can play center as well. Patrick's a similar type of player. He's not a guy like you want starting 17 games. You want to do better than that, but just a really, really solid veteran presence. I'd really like to see him be the guy. So certainly if that were to happen, I'll be here to talk about it. Join me again tomorrow night about the same time, 7:30 Pacific time, where again, it'll be a members only live feed. But then as soon as that wraps up, it'll be posted to the YouTube page for all to see. So be sure to subscribe. Be sure to hit that bell so you're always notified when there's new content. All the other ways you can support the show are listed down below in the description. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Until tomorrow, forever and always, go Hawks.